Today is the 28th of October 2017, and we're going to pick up our Pool of Radiance Taisho series and look at a story from The Hidden Lamp, Stories from 25 Centuries of Awakened Women, edited by Florence Kaplow and Susan Moon. And just to explain for those of you who are not aware of it, this Pool of Radiance is the chant that we just did now, the long one that's on the Xerox sheet of paper. And it contains the names of 108 teachers. And it's a companion piece that we've just started chanting the last few months to our ancestral line. Now, the ancestral line is like our family lineage. We go back master by master, starting with the Buddha and ending up with our teacher's teacher, Roshi Philip Kaplow, and passing on that way through Dogen. So it's very much our family tree. We know it's somewhat fictional in the sense that gaps needed to be filled in the historical record to create it. And it was something that was done in China, and we can understand that what it came out of in Chinese culture was a strong Confucian tradition, and the Chinese emphasis on blood ancestors and how important those were. But of course, for home leavers, what became important were one's Dharma ancestors. And so this we could say that our ancestral line came out of this need to feel a strong sense of connection back through time. And so this kind of spiritual whakapapa was developed to help us to sense where we've come from and where we're going. And this is seen as very, very important. But one of the things that has always been so up until now with this ancestral line is that many of the masters in it we don't know very much about, and they don't appear in our koan curriculums. And the other thing is that because of the nature of Buddhism in history, which was very patriarchal, there are no women in it. And so we now have this Pool of Radiance chant, which is not a linear construction. It doesn't go from the Buddha to the present, but actually starts with the present and then draws in teachers from our short, small Western stream of teachers, and then through the Japanese, and then the Chinese, and then the Indian, and then also including the mythical or prehistorical Buddhas. And the idea is for this chant to kind of balance our ancestral line by connecting us to these women masters. And also we've included in this 108 names many of the masters that we're particularly familiar with, that we feel like we have a strong connection to from within other lineages, so the Rinzai masters, Igyo masters. So we can bring in these figures who are very important to us, though we don't have a direct line back to them. So we're honouring and recognising the connections we have even outside of our ancestral line, though I think that's still important that we keep that, not abandon it altogether. We've taken some lines out of our regular ancestral line. We used to talk about the unsung women, because we started off, when we changed the chant, we started off by saying unknown women, and then a lot of scholarship got done, and it was no longer the unknown women. We did know who the women were and what their names were, and a little bit about them. So then we changed it to unsung women. But the beautiful thing is that now we are singing about these women, so we don't have to say that either. And we've sort of taken that out of our main ancestral line, so and just doing both of these chants regularly. And the reason why these women are known now and where we can sing about them and name them is largely because, at least in the West, is largely because of scholarship, that there have been women scholars over the last 20 years or so or more doing the research, unearthing the stories, and then translating some of the material that surrounds a lot of the women, especially the ones in China, but also in Japan. So in our teishos, we've been in a sort of haphazard fashion over the past few years and somewhat intermittently looking into who these women are and relying quite strongly on this book, The Hidden Lamp, that came out a few years ago, which goes into a lot of the stories, but also other sources. And skipping around, not doing it in a sort of methodical way, but just picking up stories here and there when they seemed appropriate. And so today we're going to look at one of the women from the Indian stream, which we recite near the end of the Pool of Radiance. And I think we have about 10 names, maybe a few more, which are just female disciples of the Buddha. Yeah, about 12. And they all, what we know about these women all comes from, or almost all comes from a single text, which is considered to be one of the earliest texts of classical Buddhism. It's called the Therigatha. And this Therigatha is a collection of 73 poems by female disciples of the Buddha who lived right at the time of the Buddha. Theri means female elder, and gata means verse or song. And these poems were passed down orally for hundreds of years before being written down. And so they were seen as very important and they were venerated. But after this time, there was a big gap. The women fade from the records and then disappear altogether pretty much. And we don't know whether this is because the order died out or whether it was just that the people who were deciding on what records were kept were eliminating the records about the women, or the records weren't getting made in the first place. We don't know. We've only so far looked at, I think, one other person from this group, and that's Maha Prajapati, who is the Buddha's aunt and stepmother, and who became the leader of the order of Bhikkhuni. But today we're going to take up another character from this group, and her name is Bhadda. Bhadda Kundalakesa. Now, the people here who know the Pali can correct me if my pronunciation is wrong. Kundalakesa? Yeah? Yeah. Kundalakesi. Okay. So her name actually means curly hair, and why will come out as we go through her story. So her time, she thrived during the 6th century, before the Common Era, and we'll start off just by reading the story that is told in the Hidden Lamp. And for those of you who are new, this Hidden Lamp is constructed a little bit like a koan collection, in that in each chapter a story about a woman master is told, and then there's a commentary, and the commentaries are by all different contemporary women teachers. So we'll they're not all koan-like. Some of them are more so than others. This one is could be read that way, and so we'll just read the story, and then we'll go a little bit into the background information about Bhadda. So Bhadda was a wandering Jain ascetic, famous for her debating skills. Whenever she came to a new place, she set a branch of rose apple in the ground and put out the word that whoever wished to debate her should trample the branch. When she was 70 years old, she came to Savatthi, and the Buddha's disciple Shariputra came forward to engage her in a public debate. First, she asked a series of philosophical questions of Shariputra, and he was able to answer them all. Then he said, "You have asked many questions. I would like to ask only one." She said, "Please ask, Venerable One." He asked, "One, what is that?" This was his question. One, what is that? She was unable to answer. He said, "If you don't even know that, how could you know anything else?" And began to teach her the Dharma. She was so moved by the teachings that she fell at his feet and asked to take refuge with him. But instead, he told her to come and meet the Buddha. The Buddha recognized her spiritual maturity and said to her, "One phrase that brings peace is better than 1,000 words that have no use." And this became part of the Dhammapada, the sort of pithy sayings of the Buddha. And when she heard these words, she was finally freed and became an arahant. Then the Buddha ordained her, saying simply, "Bhadda, come." Okay, so that's our story in a nutshell. So just to give a bit of background to this story so that we can sort of understand what is going on in this drama. First of all, it mentions that she was a Jain. This was a religion founded by Mahavira, who was roughly contemporary with the Buddha. And the Jain faith had strong ascetic teachings, and Bhadda joined the Svetambaras, who were known, their name meant the white-clad ones, and they taught that women could attain moksha, or liberation, and they were actually the first religion in the world to allow women to ordain. So just for more background information, we're going to turn to another text called The First Buddhist Women, which is translations and commentaries on the Therigatha. And this is by Susan Murcott. So Bhadda was born into a wealthy family in the city of Rajagaha, and her father was actually the treasurer of the city, a kind of important and influential position. And one day, when she was about 16 years old, she looked out the window and saw a man being led to be executed, and she fell in love with him. And here we should kind of give them more background that as a wealthy young woman, she would have led a very sheltered life, and so you can imagine that looking out the window and seeing things out the window might be quite a big part of a 16-year-old's life. And anyhow, she saw this robber, this highway robber, being taken to be executed. And she immediately fell madly in love with this guy. And she begged and begged her father to get him to be released. And the father, out of, could say, misguided love for his daughter, did, and he was able to because of his position. He bribed the guards, and in one version of the story actually had an innocent man replace the thief and go for execution. And so then he extricated this man from his fate, had him bathed, dressed him in fine clothes, and brought him before his daughter. And so I can immediately start to get an impression of Bhadda that she must have been pretty headstrong to make such a request in the first place, and probably pretty unhappy. And also, judging by her father's response, she was probably quite spoiled, used to getting her what she wanted. We're also told that she had a sharp wit and intelligence that wasn't really acknowledged in terms of how she was educated as a woman, but obviously not as you will see in the story, emotionally intelligent. So this robber's name was Satuka, and he was the son of a king's minister, so also somebody of wealth and influence. And despite having this being highborn, having this kind of family background, he didn't at this point sort of rise to the occasion and change his ways, but was more interested in Bhadda's jewels than he was in her. And so he made up a story once he'd been released, that when he was on his way to be executed, he made a vow to the deities of the cliff that they were going past, that if he was spared, he would return and make an offering. So under this pretext, he got Bhadda to prepare an offering, put on all her finery and all her jewels, and go to this cliff, and then leave the attendants behind at the foot of the cliff and climb up to the top of this precipice, and ostensibly to make offerings to the deities of the cliff. But you can probably guess what's going to happen. At the summit of the cliff, he reveals his true wishes, which is to take all her jewelry and throw her off the cliff. And so he ordered her to remove her outer garment and wrap her jewels up inside this outer garment. And she, in a kind of extremity, just asked, realizing what was going to happen, she asked if she could have one last wish. And she asked if she could embrace him once before he threw her off the cliff. He agreed, and she embraced him and then pushed him off. And he fell off the cliff and died. The cliff deity actually, the story goes that he applauded her, praising her keen presence of mind, and we could understand this as self-defense, that if she hadn't done it, she would have perished. The cliff deity in one version said, "Wisdom is not always confined to men. A woman too is wise and shows it now and then." But pretty much as soon as she had done it, she was filled with shame and remorse. And if she had not murdered this guy, she certainly had been responsible for his death, and possibly for 2 deaths if we go by the version of the story which has an innocent person being substituted in the execution. And we can also imagine that in that moment when she pushed her assailant off the cliff, there could have been sharp anger. She was so ashamed of what she had done that she felt she couldn't go back to her family. And we're told that eventually she chose to enter the order of the Svetambara Jains. And when she was asked by the nuns of this order what level of renunciation she wanted to undertake, Bhadda said that she wanted to commit herself to their severest asceticism. And this severe asceticism involved removing all her hair, but not having it shaved off, but pulled out. All her hairs pulled out one by one. Later on, when she was wandering about, she didn't maintain this, and her hair grew back curly, and that's where she got her name from, because this name means curly-headed one, or curly-haired. And in her desire to undertake the most severe forms of asceticism, we can guess that this has to do with her guilt and her wanting to perhaps in some sense requite the damage that she had done. Also, we can see in this story a parallel with the story of the Buddha himself, in that she in these two first parts of the story, she goes from self-indulgence of being a kind of a spoiled child, getting what she wants, and then swinging from that extreme over into the extreme of self-mortification, just as the Buddha made that pendulum swing. Eventually, we're told, she mastered all the Jain teachings, but she still wasn't satisfied. And she left the group and travelled. She became a wanderer and travelled here and there in search of teachers with whom she could debate. And as the story said before, whenever she arrived in a new place, her method of announcing her desire to undertake debate was to stick a branch of rose apple in a pile of sand, and then if somebody wanted to debate with her, they would kick or trample on this branch, and that was the sign that a debate was going to happen, and she would be ready to have an encounter. And we're told that she became an expert in this debating, and always you can imagine it would be about philosophical matters, and she nobody could best her in this form of engagement. And in this we can see her restlessness and her desire to resolve questions, even if the way she's going about it is not that skillful. She was seeking answers. She was seeking the truth. And then one day, after she'd been doing this a long time, we're told 50 years, she came to Savatthi and went through her usual thing of sticking out her rose apple branch. And Shariputra sees it, and he gets some local kids to knock down the branch, and so they go ahead and meet in debate. A crowd gather around, and Bhadda put her questions to Shariputra, and we're told that he could answer all of them, even the most abstruse ones. And when it came to his turn, he asked just one question. One. What is that? And Bhadda was stumped. For all her cleverness and all her understanding of philosophical terms, she couldn't answer. As if her mind had sort of come to a halt. All along, all through her life, she'd been searching for some kind of certainty, but now she found. She realized, you could say, that she had been collecting names and labels and categories, but the thing itself, she still was not intimate with it. Also, we can imagine that the way in which Shariputra engaged in this debate would have had in itself a calming effect on her. She would sense that there was nobody there trying to win the argument with him. He was just responding without any judgment. And so she recognizing his wisdom and her own need to understand in a different kind of way, she goes down and before him and prostrates before him and asks if he will become her teacher. And at this point he says, well, come and meet the Buddha. So she comes before the Buddha, and he sees the potential. He sees that all that she's been doing over these past 50 years in her searching is coming to fruition. And he says these famous lines, one phrase that brings peace is better than 1,000 words that have no use. And when she hears this, she drops those 1,000 words that she's been carrying around with her. And her mind completely opens. And the Buddha, seeing what's happened, just puts out his hand and says, "Come, Bhadda." And this was the earliest form of the ordination ritual. And she's the only person, the only woman that's recorded as having been brought into the Sangha, ordained in this fashion. And she was considered as being the first among the nuns in the speed with which she gained nirvana. But of course, really, there was those years of wandering and searching that sit in behind her deep awakening before the Buddha. And she wrote some verses to express her or commemorate her awakening. She writes, "I cut my hair and wore the dust, and I wandered in my one robe, finding fault where there was none, and finding no fault where there was." And I'm guessing this is referring to her asceticism. "Then I came for my rest one day at Vulture Peak and saw the pure Buddha with his monks. I bent my knee, paid homage, pressed my palms together. We were face to face. 'Come, Buddha,' he said. That was my ordination. I have wandered throughout Anga and Magadha, Vajji, Kasi and Kosala, 55 years with no debt. I have enjoyed the alms of these kingdoms. A wise lay follower gained a lot of merit. He gave a robe to Buddha, who is free of all bonds." Free of all bonds. We see this shift with her from a kind of lonely restlessness into intimacy, into coming face to face with the Buddha, and this recognition occurring. And then she's brought into the Sangha with this, "Come, Buddha." I can be sure that after this she didn't need to win an argument anymore. In a sense, she's moved from having to be engaging in debates, which is not a very sort of intimate form of conversation, to being in communion with all things, all people. In the commentary that's given on this story in Hidden Lamp, this is by somebody called Beth Kanji Goldring, and she is a Zen priest and a student of the late Maureen Stewart Roshi. She was a humanities professor, and then she founded the Brahma Vihara Cambodia chaplaincy organisation for destitute AIDS patients in Phnom Penh, Cambodia, where she lives and works. So writing about this story, she says, one of the great beauties of Buddha's story is that, like the stories of Angulimala, the murderer, and of Milarepa, who practiced black magic, it speaks of transformation within this lifetime. Whatever harm we have done, however great, it is possible through sincere effort, sustained by wise teaching, to put it fully behind and to enter into freedom, compassion, and intimacy. Buddha's story speaks to us not only of realization, but of redemption. As one who has done harm in my life, I treasure this possibility. We can all take heart in this. We may feel there are things that we've done that we're ashamed of, that weigh on us, but it is possible to really transform these things as Buddha did. Let them fuel our search, our perplexity, and eventually have that perplexity break open. Another thing that this is pointing to, which is a really important point, is that in Buddhism there isn't like a an ironclad system of retribution that happens after doing something like killing. And Beth Kanji Goldring alludes to this when she mentions the story of Angulimala. Angulimala was a mass murderer, and said to have, in some versions, he's said to have killed 99 people. Another one, I think, 999. One hundred in the canon, and then in the commentary 999. This is, I'm reading a little bit from an article about by Tanisaru Bhikkhu, which is about wisdom over justice. He says the conflict between retributive justice and true happiness is well illustrated by the famous story of Angulimala. Angulimala was a bandit who killed many people. The canon counts at least 100, the commentary 999, and he wore a garland made of their fingers, which is where he got his name from. Yet, after an encounter with the Buddha, he had such an extreme change of heart that he abandoned his violent ways, awakened a sense of compassion, and eventually became an arahant. Most of us like to identify with Angulimala. If a person with his history could gain awakening, there's hope for us all. But in identifying with him, we forget the feelings of those he had terrorized and the relatives of those he had killed. After all, he had literally gotten away with murder. It's easy to understand then, as the story tells us, that when Angulimala was going for alms after his awakening, people would throw stones at him, and he'd return from his round, his head broken open and dripping with blood, his bowl broken, and his outer robe ripped to shreds. As the Buddha reassured him, his wounds were nothing compared with the sufferings he would have undergone if he hadn't reached awakening. And if the outraged people had fully satisfied their thirst for justice, meting out the suffering they thought he deserved, he wouldn't have had the chance to reach awakening at all. So his was a case in which the end of suffering took precedence over justice in any strict sense of the word. If we think of justice as meaning you have to pay exactly the same price as whatever you committed, kind of eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But we can imagine that Angulimala, when this happened to him, when people threw rocks at him or attacked him, that he would have completely understood that this was his karma because of his former deeds, his violent deeds, and he would have been as an awakened person accepting that maltreatment without clinging to a sense of resentment towards those people who were attacking him, and in that way he would have been expiating his negative karma. Tanisaru writes, Angulimala's case illustrates a general principle stated in AN 3.101, that's the Anguttara Nikaya. If the workings of karma required strict tit-for-tat justice, with your having to experience the consequences of each act just as you inflicted it on others, there's no way that anyone could reach the end of suffering. The reason we can reach awakening is because even though actions of a certain type give a corresponding type of result, the intensity of how that result is felt is determined not only by the original action, but also, and more importantly, by our state of mind when the results ripen. If you've developed unlimited goodwill and equanimity and have trained well in virtue, discernment, and the ability to be overcome neither by pain nor pleasure, then when the results of past bad actions ripen, you'll hardly experience them at all. If you haven't trained yourself in these ways, then even the results of a trifling bad act can consign you to hell because of the way you react. The Buddha illustrates this principle by using the image of if you think of the results of your past negative actions as being like a large lump of salt, and you put that into a cup of water, then that water becomes undrinkable because there's so much, it's so salty. But if you put that same large chunk of salt into a huge lake, then the water is still quite drinkable because the lake is very large and can just absorb that salt. And he used this as an analogy for this. If you think of the salt as being the results of our past actions, negative results, then if our mind is narrow and small, then those things can really throw us. But if we've managed to develop an expansive mind, a mind that's not constricted, then the same effects will be very different. We'll experience them very differently. And we may interpret with Bhadda that her taking up severe ascetics practices was her recognition that she needed to change and train, you could say, train her mind, move away from the narrow, selfish mind that she had as a young 16-year-old, and develop something that was a lot more expansive and able to take ups and downs without being bothered. So you can see this theme, and then the theme of coming to greater intimacy with things in this story. And time is up. Just finish. At the end of each of these chapters, the editors propose some questions, and just leave people with these questions. We can take them up if we want to during a tea break. The questions they pose are: how do you know when to stop talking? How do you give up the knowledge that keeps you apart from others? And what does not knowing have to do with intimacy? And this is from a famous quote from, I think it's case number 20 in the Shoyoroku, where a master responds, a master asks a monk, why is he going on pilgrimage? And he says, I don't know. And the master says, not knowing is most intimate. This was the turning point for Bhadda when she realized that she didn't know the answer to Shariputra's question, what? What is this one? What is this one? We'll stop here and recite the 4 vows.